Good morning and welcome to episode 5 of the Duval 22 podcast. My name is Gus Logue. This morning I'm very excited to be joined by my good friend Demetrius Harvey of the Florida Times-Union. Deme has been working on the beat for years now, not just with the Times-Union. Before that he was at Big Cat Country, so shout out SB Nation forever, what have you. But Deme, so glad that you're joining us this morning to break down the Jaguars' Week 3 win over the Texans. How's the season treated you so far?
Yeah, no, it's been it's been an interesting season. I kind of came into it with a big open mind just because it's obviously a whole brand new coaching staff, a whole brand new leadership group, really, and so it's been interesting. I think that it's been fun, it's been exciting, it's been different. It's always going to be better when you have fresh faces to get to know, and it sort of feels like everybody's starting on the ground level. So for me, just as a reporter, it's been great. It's been a fun season so far. 3 weeks, we're already almost a quarter of the way through the season, which is crazy to think about. But it always rolls off pretty fast.
Yeah, it happens quick. I feel like the past couple of years have been a little bit of a slower start, where it's like, oh man, we're only entering week 4 right now. But this year, I don't know. Maybe it's because things are different. Things are moving a little bit quicker. But like I said, we're going to be breaking down the Week 3 game between Houston and Jacksonville. The Jaguars able to squeak by in what was, I think, Liam Cohen's first big test as a head coach, considering that even if they lost to the Bengals in Week 2, the Bengals without Joe Burrow, and then the Panthers are a little bit of inferior opponents compared to the in-division rival that is the Houston Texans. Although they are now 0-3, they were favored to win the AFC South going into the season. So let's start out with the offensive side of the ball, Deme. What was your biggest takeaway, or just a takeaway that you had from watching the offense on Sunday?
Yeah, honestly, it was kind of. I guess the biggest takeaway was just the inefficiency. I think they were maybe 25% conversion rate on third down. They just weren't able to get into a rhythm. I think also in the first half, I want to say they only ran the ball 6 times, something like that. It just wasn't a typical, and I say this, and we've only had 2 games, but it wasn't a typical Liam Cohen style of offense. It just felt like nothing could go right necessarily after that touchdown drive, which is the second drive of the game. So my biggest takeaway was just, hey, this offense is still growing. It's still learning. There's going to be a lot of kinks. There's going to be a lot of different things that are going to go wrong early on. But, you can see the glimpses every week. You can see it. But even in this game, I felt like you could see the glimpses of what Liam Cohen wants to bring to the table. You saw Bashal Tutin in terms of what he was able to bring, just being able to make something out of nothing. And, I think that this year that the offense is going to have to be that kind of offense where it's not always going to go right. And honestly, it's probably mostly going to go wrong. But, you have to sort of overcome that. I think, in terms of Trevor, it just seemed like a game where he's not fully on target, fully, in good shape. But at the same time, I think that obviously the rest of the offense, the mechanics of the offense have to go well. And they just didn't. So it was just more of like a, that's a backseat kind of game. Like you take it, you watch the tape and you kind of burn it almost if you're the offense, and then you kind of move forward and just hope that your plan still works.
Yeah, the first half especially was pretty inefficient. As you said, they scored on their second drive, but that was almost more so the opening drive, because on their actual opening drive, the Jaguars went 3 and out, largely because they were backed up on their own 8-yard line, so they didn't really have a lot of room to operate. They were kind of playing pretty conservative, and understandably, and just didn't want to give the ball away with really good field position for the Texans. So then they ended up scoring on their second drive, which I feel like was kind of more so still the opening script. And then after that, as you said, I think they had 6 carries for 11 rushing yards in the first half. Cohen did say after the game that they were a little bit caught off guard by some of the fronts that the Texans had in terms of defending the run. And then the Jaguars, even though they weren't super efficient or super explosive on the ground in the second half, they were definitely better and were able to at least pick up some 4 to 5 yard chunk gains, a couple of first downs. And so I'm interested. I'll be diving back into the film or diving into the film after we finished recording to see like what exactly changed for the Jaguars' running game, because you're right, it's not really like the Liam Cohen offense that we've seen, not necessarily in terms of like, oh, he's doing way different concepts or like calling the game way differently, but like they just had to win it in an ugly game, and it was complimentary football where like even if Trevor Lawrence had a pretty ugly interception, the Jaguars were charged with 5 drops on the day by PFF. The running game was up and down, but at the end of the day, they did just enough to squeak out the win, and so they were complimentary in that, like, again, other than Trevor Lawrence's interception they threw into double coverage after consecutive drops, like they were pretty careful in terms of like not giving the ball away, and I think that definitely helps them to end up winning the game. And so even if it did look ugly at times or even looked ugly for the majority of the game, I think it was encouraging to see that the offense could win in a different way and they could like eke out these close, gritty wins as opposed to like feeling like they have to score 20 plus, 30 plus points.
Yeah, no, I mean, Trevor said it perfectly kind of after the game where it felt like they didn't have to be perfect to win. And in the years past, I know for a fact that that's what Trevor's mindset was, is that he felt like he had to play exceptionally in order to win. He had to win the game. And I think that even you saw a glimpse of that with that interception. You know, he throws into double coverage. That's obviously not something that he was taught to do. He was just trying to make a play. It was one of those things where he's like, you know, let's just get it up there and see what happens. And that doesn't always work out. And it didn't work out for him on that particular play. But like you said, the previous 2 plays were drops. You know, some frustration gets there and you're like, you know what, whatever, I'm just going to throw it up and we're going to see what happens. So I do think that, you know, at times I think Trevor has fallen into that trap, and I think that it was just great recovery at the end when you spoke about, you know, obviously they were able to rebound. You know, Brian Thomas was a good example of that. I mean, he is a guy who even coming into the game was just getting destroyed online by reporters. I mean, like every day people are talking about him, talking about how, you know, he's just not good enough. Then he comes in and has the same issues, like even worse, actually, I would say his drops yesterday were worse than his drops against the Bengals, just because there were some wide open. Yeah. It was just a little like if you're Brian, you can tell that the frustration had set in. You know, when he had the one drop late, I remember hearing around the press box, you know, yips, this is not going to work out, blah, blah, blah. I even thought it myself. I was like, well, you know, maybe this is not going to work. But then he comes out and he makes the game winning play essentially. You know, he's able to get open. Trevor does a great job, changes the play completely. I think they had a run called on that play. He changes the protection. He sees the zero blitz coming and he throws it to Brian Thomas down the field. And it was almost like a vintage Brian Thomas play. That's exactly what you want from a guy who runs a 4.33 40. You know, so you know, I think that in the end, that play sort of encapsulated what the Jaguars offense was able to do yesterday. It was yeah, you know, they struggled the entire game. They were not looking good. The Texans could have easily won the game if you think about it, but it didn't matter because they were able to go ahead, get that 46-yard gain, and then obviously the Texans let the Jaguars have a touchdown. But at the same time, you know, you want to just score points. You want to get out of there with 7, and that's what they did, and then they let the defense do the rest.
Yeah, I totally agree with you where I think like that play to Brian Thomas is easily the biggest play of the game on either side of the ball. Obviously, there was a lot of other important plays made or even not made throughout the course of the game, but especially for Brian Thomas to be on the receiving end of it after he was dealing with drops, not just on Sunday, but also in week 2, and just like hadn't looked like his 2024 self through the first 2 or 3 games of 2025. So for him to be able to get that kind of not necessarily even game winning or game clinching, but to have that huge play that ended up leading to a win had to have been huge for his confidence. Cohen did like shout him out in the locker room, like when he was giving the post game speech. Shout out both Brian Thomas and Tyson Campbell for kind of like having to fight through adversity within the specific game, within 60 minutes of like Tyson got toasted on a double move by Nico Collins to allow the 50-yard touchdown. But then he came back and had 2 clutch pass breakups in the fourth quarter after that play. And then, yeah, Brian, again, making that clutch play has to be huge for not just the entire team, but him personally, himself. What do you make of the drops as a whole? Because it's not just Brian Thomas. I think DeAndre Brown had a drop. Parker Washington had 2 drops, which was pretty surprising to see. I think Hunter Long might have had one. Again, the Jaguars were charged with 5 drops on Sunday after being charged with either 5 or 6 drops last week against Cincinnati. And so there's a almost conspiracy theory, I feel going out there about how Trevor doesn't throw a catchable ball, and it's on the way that he throws a spiral or how hard he throws or something like that. Do you have? I don't have any explanation really, so I don't know if you have not necessarily an explanation, but just any thought as to what it all means or how it could be fixed moving forward.
Yeah, it's hard to say, right? I mean, a lot of that, it feels like a lot of the drops can be just chalked up to concentration issues, but when it becomes an issue, when it keeps piling up, there feels like there needs to be something else that's going on. I think Trevor leads the league or not Trevor, but Trevor's passes have been dropped the most, however you say it, over the last few years. And so it's just it's a situation where you're well, there's been multiple different receivers. Calvin Ridley's been here. There's been, obviously Gabe Davis, Zay Jones. There's been other receivers that have been here. They've all had drops too. At what point does it become an issue within how Trevor delivers the ball? I do think that some of that is on Trevor. Not all of it at all. I think a lot of it's just concentration, just chalked up to drop balls happen. But there have been times where Trevor might throw it a little bit behind, not perfect placement. I mean, you saw it in the Bengals game where Liam Cohen was saying hit him in his chest, talking about Deame on that drop touchdown, and it's that's the placement that you need to get it to give it the most catchable pass. But at the same time, these are NFL wide receivers. You get the ball in your hands, you catch it. That's sort of what it boils down to, especially a guy like Brian Thomas, drafted in the first round, comes in with high expectations, a great season last year, 11 touchdowns, over 1,200 yards, just it's kind of a strange feeling because you think and that other elite wide receivers around the NFL aren't doing this. They're not just dropping a bunch of passes, especially the ones where you got to have it. Brian dropped a pass yesterday even where it would have been incredible, and then Derek Stingley you can see him hit, with his right hand, I think. He hits the ball. You can kind of say that's a pass breakup, but again, this is a supposedly elite wide receiver. He should be able to hold on to the ball regardless of if the defensive back sort of taps it. So it's really hard to say. I will say there are times where Trevor definitely throws the ball too hard. I don't know if you saw, but the first LaQuint Allen catch, he caught it, but Trevor, they're 7 yards apart maybe, and Trevor just beams it to him. And I just got flashbacks to Tank Bigsby and the ball going back through his head, and I feel bad because it's what is Tank supposed to do on that play? And they felt the same with Allen, but he caught it. So I do think that Trevor does have an issue a little bit, but I can't for the life of me, I'm not gonna blame a quarterback for his wide receivers dropping the ball. I think that there just needs to be more concentration, better hands, simple as that, really.
For sure. Hopefully that's a problem that ends up kind of fixing itself over the course of the season. Last thing on the offense before we go to the other side of the ball, DeAndre Brown did leave. I think it was in the second quarter, correct me if I'm wrong, with some kind of injury, which we don't really know much about because as far as I know, Cohen didn't really harp on it yesterday after the game, and so he's talking at 1 o'clock today, so I'm sure we'll learn more at that point. But from the way that he kind of got off the field and then left to go to the locker room before halftime had officially started, it seems that it might be somewhat serious, and so let's assume that he'll be out for at least one game, maybe a couple of games. If that's the case, how do you see the receiver room kind of shaking out and just even the offense as a whole kind of adapting to that loss?
Yeah, it's going to be tough because Deame, obviously veteran wide receiver, you brought him in for a reason. He's made some pretty clutch plays already this season. He had a touchdown already, so it's going to be tough. They wanted I think this will impact them a pretty good bit because they wanted a situation where Travis Hunter can play defense, Travis Hunter can play offense, and you can kind of manage his offensive snaps because you have Deme, you have Parker Washington. So now it's going to sort of flip a little bit. Well, this is me speculating. I assume that Travis would fill that gap, kind of. Obviously, we're going to see a little bit more of Tim Patrick, like we saw yesterday. But the reason why Travis might not have been in or as involved is because I know that they wanted to get him primarily on defense yesterday. So it's going to be a tough situation to sort of manage. I don't know how long Deme will be out. The one thing that kind of gives me like a glimmer of hope for him is that they didn't. Usually if it's a collarbone, they just say, they know it's a collarbone and they say it after the game, and Liam would have said something, but he didn't. So it leads me to believe like maybe this is more of either an AC joint or whatever the case may be with his shoulder. And so hopefully for them that he's not out for very long. But you're right, it's going to be a tough challenge. Brian's going to have to step up. There's not going to be any leeway there. So, Travis Hunter is probably going to have to play more on offense. So I imagine his defensive snaps could come down. The good part of that, though, is that the Jaguars just got back Monteric Brown. They like him a lot. I personally think that he would be a pretty good fit in the defense because we've seen what he was able to do during the spring. And he's been able to tackle. He's proven to be able to tackle even though his frame doesn't look like it. So, I do think that they're in good shape in terms of being able to manage that because of the depth they have at corner. Because Travis Hunter is such a versatile player, but yeah, it's going to be a big hurt because I do believe that him and Trevor, I'm talking about Deme and Trevor, had a pretty good connection. You could see that during training camp and then up to now. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do.
Yeah, Deme's going to be a hard guy to replace just because, no one's more versatile than Travis Hunter because he plays both sides of the ball. But Deme is, very much a glue guy for the offense, I feel like. He can be receiving threat at all three levels of the field. He's arguably their best blocker among pass catchers at least, or at least among the wide receiver group. It's probably him and Tim Patrick pretty easily, the top two guys. So he can be used in a lot of different roles, a lot of different assignments, a lot of different alignments. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out, especially since we don't really know too much about the injury as of this moment. But Travis Hunter did play more defensive snaps than offensive snaps for the first time in his young career on Sunday. What was a takeaway that you had? The first thing that kind of hits your mind when thinking about the defensive performance yesterday in the Week 3
win? being completely aggressive. It felt like the defense sort of just clicked from the very first snap. It didn't. I think you could even see it. I think Josh Allen comes out, splits the tight end and the tackle, sort of forces. I think Nick Chubb had the carry, kind of forces him down, and that was the first snap of the game. So I think they set the tone very well. I think Liam Cohen came into the game knowing that the defense was going to have to set the tone, and that's why he deferred. And he kind of explained that in post game. So yeah, I do think the defense was able to show you exactly what they've been showing. Honestly, the first two games of the season, yeah, against the Bengals they allowed too much to happen, but at the same time you could see sort of how this defense is going to come together. You saw that week 1, and now you see it again in week 3. Just being able to get the pressure on the quarterback. Josh Hines Allen probably had his best game of the season, definitely, but then it's one of his best games of his career, in my opinion, just in terms of what he was able to do in terms of disruption. Jordan Lewis is another guy who just keeps. It's kind of crazy because when they first signed him from the Cowboys, I hadn't really. I mean, I'd watch him from afar, I guess, but not specifically him. I watch Cowboys games, and I know that they had secondary issues, for a while, but that was mostly with the safeties. And Jordan Lewis has been a staple in that secondary for so long, and then he comes to Jacksonville. He immediately becomes, in my opinion, probably the best defender on the team in terms of consistency and what he's been able to do, the impact plays. Him him, Josh Hines Allen, Trayvon Walker have been the MVPs. Foye Oluokun has been really good. Devin Lloyd, I'll have to give a shout out to him, especially because of what he's been through the first 3 years of his career. It's been completely up and down. He goes from rookie of the month in his rookie year, and then all of a sudden he kind of tapers off. He loses snaps to Chad Muma. I mean, a lot of stuff was happening. Ventrell Miller was getting snaps in week 1 because they were trying to figure out who is going to start, basically. And Devin has shown them and proven to them in practice, and then obviously in the games now. And you see Ventrell Miller's snaps have gone down to, I think, 2. So it's a good situation for the Jaguars defense when Devin Lloyd can have can start making plays, can start doing things, because I feel like this defense needed some more power, especially because, in my opinion, the safety room wasn't necessarily the strongest this year, even coming in, and so you need other units to sort of pick up the slack. And although I will say the safety unit has been pretty solid. Dewey Wingard has looked good at times. Eric Murray has done his thing. They're not elite household names, but you know what? They're getting the job done, and I think that's sort of what encapsulates the Jaguars defense right now.
Absolutely, they're definitely getting the job done. For the first time in franchise history, the Jaguars have recorded 3 takeaways in their first 3 games of the season. It might actually be like a franchise record for just 3 straight takeaways in any 3-game stretch. But it's certainly for the first 3 games. The Jaguars are also they have 7 interceptions this season, which is the 4th most by any team through the first 3 games of the season in the last 20 years. And so they've generated takeaways in bunches, and I think that the scheme has a lot to do with that. I mean, obviously the players too; they're the ones actually making the plays. But especially in terms of when you think about the difference in the scheme going from last year to this year, just being a lot more opportunistic, putting players in positions to succeed by kind of having different front deployments and kind of muddying up the opposing pass protection rules, being able to get even not necessarily just completely free, wide open rushing lanes, but just a little bit easier rushing lanes to be able to affect the quarterback in a hurry, and then a lot more zone defense on the back end, guys having their eyes on the quarterback, on the passer, and being able to use their instincts to break on the ball. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the takeaways specifically, because on one hand, it's definitely going to regress. The team is not going to have 3 takeaways in every single game. If they do that, I'll have Jalen Ramsey's dinner for a month straight. The numbers are gonna go down, but at the same time, I just kind of outlined, the scheme and the players are they're kind of earning it. And so how much do you think it's gonna go down? Just how do you see the defense kind of playing out for the rest of the season? Noting just how many turnovers they've forced already.
Yeah, you might want to start loading up on Mike and Ike soon. No. Yeah, no, it's obviously. I mean, 9 turnovers. I mean, this team had 9 turnovers all of last season, 8 on defense, 1 special teams, and now they've had 9 turnovers on defense through 3 games. So, I mean, obviously, the difference there is remarkable, and I do think that obviously it's going to start coming down a little bit. I don't expect them to always get 3 turnovers, but this defense is based on getting to the ball and seeing the ball in front of you. It's not, I feel like in years past they sort of played their backs to the ball a lot. They were playing more man, which can be good. It can, create opportunities for the pass rush to get home in time, because in zone you can sort of, quick hit it sometimes. But at the same time, you've noticed that these guys are using their athleticism. Devin Lloyd is using his athleticism. Tyson Campbell, like you said earlier, makes a couple pass breaks, but also forces the fumble to basically give the Jaguars an opportunity to go win the game. So those are the sort of trademarks of this defense so far, is that they're never going to quit, and they're never going to they're never going to give up on a ball. You've seen these tip passes in the air get picked off. Foye Oluokun had one the other week. Obviously Antonio Johnson this week. It's just it's gonna take a. It would take a miracle, in my opinion, for them to get 3 interceptions, three turnovers every single game throughout the rest of the season. Obviously, they're not going to do that. But in terms of regression, I don't necessarily, because I think even in 2023, I think it was 2023, where the Jaguars were leading the league in turnovers, and they were, get takeaways, think takeaways. That was the mantra, and it was working for a while, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. I even think that some of those were a little bit, I don't want to say luck based or like lucky, because it is football still. But there were a lot of times where you're like, ooh, that ball bounced their way there, that kind of thing. I think that this defense is forcing the turnovers. They're being more active in this. It's not the other team sort of messing up. It's Jordan Lewis is breaking on the ball, or Eric Murray is breaking on the ball, or Tyson Campbell is punching out the ball, which is so cool to see, because you can see them practicing that even during the 15 minutes that we're able to get during the week. They have this one drill, and I'm sure every team has it, but the one corner is running with the football, the other corner kind of comes up, and then they swat it out. They're just practicing, punching out the football. Little things like that mean something. We saw it basically in practice yesterday. So yeah, I do think that there's going to be a natural regression. They're not going to get 3 every single week, like you said. I'll start Jalen Ramsey's diet too. I don't think that that's going to work. So, but I do think that this defense is apt to get these takeaways, and a lot of that has to do with guys like Josh Hines-Allen, Trayvon Walker making plays on the ball, getting pressure, and then obviously the Jaguars athletes making plays. Eventually one is going to break loose for even a Travis Hunter for sure. So I do think it's been good, and it'll be interesting to see how they sort of moving forward.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement. We're just naturally, based on statistics and regression and what have you, the numbers will go down relatively. But when you actually look at all the individual turnovers that the Jaguars have forced, there's something to it. It's like a good recipe that they have, and so I'm sure they'll continue to be able to do it in bunches through the rest of the season. I do think that removing turnovers from the conversation, one thing the Jaguars have done a great job of is not just creating explosive plays for themselves by generating the turnovers, but also limiting explosive plays, because it feels like the only big plays that they've allowed this year have been to number one wide receivers. Nico Collins had the 50-yarder. He had 2 more catches of 17 and 18 yards, I think. Last week, Jamar Chase obviously went off, and T. Higgins had a long touchdown too, but he's a great receiver. And then Ted McMillan had a nice day in week 1. But all of those guys are to a certain extent, they're gonna get theirs because they're just that good. And really, outside of those 4 uber talented perimeter wide receivers, the Jaguars just have not allowed a lot of explosive gains. I think part of that is the coverage shows that they're deploying. I think a large part of it is the tackling has been a huge improvement, especially relative to recent seasons. So yeah, that's one thing that I think they're doing a good job at. But then on the flip side, the offense I think needs to do a little bit of a better job creating some explosive plays. Trevor just does not really seem to have his deep ball down quite yet. I feel it feels like the explosive plays that they've got on offense have been basically from runs and screens as much as anything that's actually downfield passing. And so whether it's offense or defense or even special teams, is there anything else that you're kind of keeping your eye on in the future, Deme, to see if they can potentially improve a certain area a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, obviously on offense, like you said, the deep balls are something to be concerned about, in my opinion, because we've seen even in training camp that it just wasn't hitting. And, sometimes you can chalk that up to, hey, it's training camp, they're just trying to work on timing, whatever. But when you see it happening in the games, you have to just have a direct correlation with that. It must be something that's off with however Trevor is throwing the football, or the timing with the routes, or whatever the case may be. They're just not hitting them. I mean, yesterday before the 46-yarder by Brian Thomas, I think their longest play was 21 yards by Travis Hunter, and Travis caught the ball, I think, a couple yards past the line of scrimmage and made a huge play. That was his best play as a wide receiver in his career so far. So it's definitely a concern. You have to get these explosive plays. We saw it in week 1 with Travis Etienne with the 71-yarder. They're going to need more explosive runs. I think that is something to be concerned about. But one thing I am kind of concerned about, and no one's going to really talk about it because it's just special teams. But special teams, I mean, the returns haven't been there. The coverage honestly has been hit or miss. I don't think there were very many big returns by the Texans yesterday, but, against the Bengals, we saw a couple of returns that sort of broke free, just wide open holes. Obviously the missed field goal. I'm not going to, like Cam Little, you can kind of just, he has one missed field goal, it's fine. But the punts from Logan Cook yesterday were pretty bad until the end. So I do think the special teams unit, usually we kind of joke, like, oh, that's the best unit on the team. The best player is Logan Cook. But when that is not the case, that can actually hurt you. You have to have a good special teams unit to sort of balance out like that. If all else is equal and you have a better special teams, then you're probably going to win the game. So I do think that is something to be concerned about, but not overly so. But it's something where I think because of the churn of the roster, we're seeing sort of like a little bit of a regression in that area. So we're just gonna have to find out, I guess, over the weeks. And that new kickoff rule is really paying dividends for the NFL. I think that made sense to move the ball up to the 34 or 35 for a touchback, and it's sort of working out for the NFL right now. So yeah, those are the two things I would be most concerned about: offense, explosive plays, like you said, and then just the special teams has to get right.
Yeah, totally. I feel like there's an alternate world where like the Texans win the game on Sunday, like not necessarily because of special teams, but in large part because of special teams, because the Jaguars' unit has not been great to start the season, and the Texans, at least for the first 2 weeks, was really making a lot of kind of game-changing plans. And so it's fortunate for Jacksonville that didn't end up hurting them on the actual outcome of the game on Sunday. But you made a great point in terms of like just kind of the attrition of the bottom of the roster. There's like a lot of new guys in the building and a lot of new guys playing special teams as guys that are at the bottom of depth charts. And so hopefully, considering like what we've seen from Logan Cook and Cam Little and all of like the specific players in the past, as plus the fact that like Heath Farwell has been retained by different coaching staffs, and like we know that he's generally has the goods and is a good coach. So hopefully that'll be another thing that kind of sorts itself out as the season goes on. But Demetrius, that's all I got for you. Unless you have any other kind of lingering thoughts or questions or anything you want to get off your chest, feel free to let the people know where they can find your work and if you've got anything cooking in the near future that you're going to put out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on, obviously. It's just, I think the one thing I can say about the Jaguars this year is, and I wrote it last week, this isn't the same Jaguars team that people are used to. This isn't the same old Jags. Oh, here we go again. Woe is me, blah, 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 blah. I've seen all of that on the timeline, especially after the Bengals game. And I, at first, yesterday's game, I was like, oh man, they might be proving me wrong, or proving themselves wrong, rather. But yeah, but to me, I think that this is a more energized team. This is a more well-coached team. I think that Liam Cohen so far has shown me no reason to doubt that he's the man for the job in terms of just being able to lead a team in the right direction. Now, will he bring them Super Bowls? Maybe it's not him, but I think that at least he's going to be able to lead the team moving forward. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. You guys can find all my work on Jacksonville.com, on Twitter at Demetrius82, and I'm on Blue Sky too. Just type in Demetrius, and I think you'll find me. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate all the fans. It's been a blessing to be able to cover this team for the last 7 years. So.
Absolutely. Well, appreciate you as always, Deme. We'll definitely have you back on at some point. But thank you for your time this morning. You can find my work at duval22.com. Go check it out. Do a subscription. Check out Deme's work for sure as well. And yeah, I'll be back on Thursday for a preview episode of the Jaguars and the Niners' Week 4 game. So until then, thank you guys for watching and listening. Thanks again to Deme. Catch you guys next time.